Where's the kaboom? There was supposed to be an earth-shattering kaboom.
Welcome to the Go Use Australia podcast. It's the podcast for Australian shooters who just want the political interference taken out of shooting.
So welcome to another episode of Gun News Australia, brought to you by Politics Reloaded and Gun Traders Australia. And with the federal election coming up, I have with me Shooters, Fishing and Farmers candidate from Tasmania, Phil Bigg, with me. How you doing, Phil?
Yeah, not too bad, Neil. Yourself?
Good, thank you. Good, thanks, and congratulations on your nomination.
Yes, thank you. It's been a stressful time leading up to this, but here we are. Ballot's officially drawn.
Yeah, and you, I guess for a while it must have been some uncertainty about whether you would actually get nominated because you had a $2,000 nomination fee to raise.
Yeah, it's been really hard, especially for us in Tasmania. It's $2,000 each, right? And we would love to have lower house candidates, the House of Representative candidates in every area in Tasmania. But when you add that up, I mean, that's huge. So effectively, we've got three candidates, one in Lyons, which is the House of Reps. That's Carlo DeFalco, who has been a very prominent figure in state elections, especially. And then myself and Melanie Roach running for the Senate. Now, we did that by design because rather than running candidates everywhere and costing us a lot of money that we don't have, I mean, we'll crowdfunding to try and get money to do this. We decided to run the Senate because it gives everyone in Tasmania the opportunity to have their voice heard. And if they want to be able to vote shooters, fishers, farmers, everyone in Tasmania can do that with the Senate election. So that was I'm glad we got over the line there and we managed to get the two of us in there.
Congratulations on that. Now that you were saying to me just before we hit record that the ballots were drawn as of the date of recording being today. So how did you go there?
Yeah, so we are second last on the line of groups. So we're actually next to the Labor Party. Interesting. So I don't know how that's going to work out. One thing that's really annoyed me actually over the years with the elections is that everyone says, "Oh, your preferences go to Labor." Besides the ignorant statements that people thinking that we determine their preferences when in actual fact it's the voters. Being labelled next to Labor, it's really frustrating because we have our own voices, we do our own thing. If there's a good idea somewhere, we're going to support it no matter where. So, yeah. But can't complain too much about where we are.
It's interesting that you're actually way over on that side of the ballot paper because you're really probably better off being, I think, on one side or the other rather than in the middle.
I think it's really hard for voters, really, because unless you're involved in politics, you don't know. So for an average punter, they come across and they've got to fill this sheet out. And I know it's difficult for people to understand. So that's why, I'm here with you tonight to be able to talk about these things and try and get our message out there clear and allow people to understand that we don't preference Labor.
Yeah, well, I guess the easy question, the easy answer really is shooters wanting to vote, SFP can do that. How can they control their preferences? What can they do?
Well, it all comes down to them. So when you go to that little box and you fill out your paper, you're numbering. That's your control. That it comes down to the voters and who they choose at the end of the day. Now, when we look at Liberal, Labor, and the Greens, well, obviously they have little things behind the scenes. So as we know, Labor and Greens generally super glued to each other, and they'll support each other through a whole lot of things. I cannot understand why, because going off the past couple of elections, the Greens have had some good numbers and good on them, but they could have done a lot more rather than sucking up to the red. They could have crossed the floor to the Liberals and said, no, we're going to shoot this down. But this is the problem with politics these days.
So I guess in terms of directing preferences, the easiest way for shooters to actually control what they do without having to fill in every box is the ballot paper will have the instructions on it. It will say how many boxes you need to number at a minimum. So you don't need to fill in, 70 or 80 boxes or anything. You only need to fill in whatever the number is for that particular
Yeah, that's
area.
right. I mean, that's why you've got above the line and below the line. I guess if you want to really get into the nitty and gritty of it when it comes to where your preferences go. But I just really want people to understand too that, you know, who you choose makes a hell of a difference, even though you think that they may not get elected. It's a matter of sending a message as well, because if you start putting the big three at the bottom and numbers start growing in the minor parties and independents, well, that makes the big three a bit more cautious about what they do in the future.
Numbers matter in this game. And in fact, the message we've got
Mm.
for shooters in Western Australia is, whilst guns are a state issue, everybody understands that, take your frustration out on the federal Labor candidates in WA to send a message to the state Labor Party, because they're still Labor. It's the same party. And in fact, I covered this a couple of episodes ago where the federal Labor candidates were listed on the state Labor Party website, so they can't divorce themselves. Take it out on them. So do conflate the issue, do cross those boundaries. And if you've got a frustration with what's happening with the shooters in Tasmania, then then throw that in there. So what are the issues in Tasmania for shooters that are at play here, whether or not they're state or federal?
Well, as some of the listeners may remember last year, so we had at the beginning of the year before the state election, we had the antiques firearms debacle where the commissioner said, no more blanket exemption. That's still ongoing. Then we had, the license application questions come along that we covered in the previous podcast. That still hasn't been addressed. You know, there's so many issues at hand that haven't been addressed for longer than a year. So we've really got to keep that momentum going and saying we've had enough. Now, the Minister, Felix Ellis, has still yet to table amendments from last year. And on, I think it was our last previous podcast, I said, I would expect him to do it in March and April. But obviously here we are in the federal election and they don't want the Liberal Party to look bad in Tasmania. So he's holding off until the federal election's over before tabling these amendments. And I'm quite cautious of what may be in there. I have had some rumours of what may be in there. The Commissioner's wish list of control, per se. So in Tasmania, I think we need to just be very cautious, but still stand up for our rights and, vote with your conscience and don't vote with the emotion. You have to understand what's at play here, not just in Tasmania, but Australia-wide, because during this federal election, the choices you make go across the country.
Yeah, I think my message to shooters is don't let people like Felix Ellis to get away with this. Hold them to account. I keep coming back to the fact that when you vote, if you're doing a postal vote or absentee or early voting or voting on the day, you're still taking 20 minutes or half an hour of your day to organise that. So, if you're rolling up to the polling booth, you park the car, 10 minutes to get to where you've got to go to, 5 minutes to line up, get your ballot papers. Don't just throw your vote away. You've already spent 20 minutes, 30 minutes organising it. Take 1 or 2 minutes to really think through what you're doing, vote, and then go off and go to Bunnings or whatever you want to do. But don't just tick boxes because that's what you used to do or your dad used to do. Vote. You really do think about it. Just stop for a minute. That's all it is.
Yeah, and that kind of mentality of, my father, my grandfather voted Liberal or Labor. I mean, if we look at Labor, they started as a shearers, that's where they came from. And now look where they are. The sellouts, effectively, the way I see it, just like Liberal are. They're two faces of the same coin.
Absolutely are. It's very hard to pick them apart. I mean, they're all doing, I don't know, this welcome to country thing, or they're pandering to minority groups who don't contribute anything to, to what we do. And it's very frustrating because it's also our money at work. That's what our money pays for.
Absolutely. And a couple of things too. When we come up to selecting who we want to vote for, I've said this, I think it was with a Hunting Connection podcast, that you know, with the Trumpian effect, as we like to call it, I would really appreciate people to not vote for people who have jumped on the bandwagon all of a sudden. You know, standing up for our rights all of a sudden. Look at the history of these people and look where they've stood before and what they've stood up for. That is paramount. Because if they've jumped on the bandwagon, I can guarantee you they're going to sell you out the second they get the chance to. You know, it really pisses me off that we have these people thinking they can jump up and down saying that they're going to protect your rights when in fact they have done nothing for you in the past. So
doing it for themselves. They're doing it for themselves, and I think of a certain Queensland, magnate who is always hanging around federal elections.
Yes,
rebranded his party, and now it's titled what Trumpet of Patriots or whatever it is. For exactly that reason, it's really for him to try to feed his own ego.
Yeah. And this goes on to, the other thing too. This is why I'm running for the Senate. So look at what happened in the past 6 months in federal parliament. We've had the digital ID smashed through the parliament, and the Senate couldn't do a thing. We had the hate speech laws smashed through the parliament, and the Senate didn't do anything. And it really upset me that One Nation didn't do anything. I mean, there was that awkward interview. Anyone can find it. I won't name names, obviously, at the moment, but just have a look at the interview for hate speech laws with One Nation. It was really disappointing to see that, and someone who's meant to be standing up for Australians and their rights failed to do so. So that's why the Senate's important to me, because that's where you do the checks and balances of what comes from the lower house. You are there to scrutinise and make sure it balances out right for the people of Australia.
Okay. So I think for shooters, you've seen what can happen to gun laws in Western Australia. Again, this is a federal election, appreciate that, but you do not want that poison to filter through either to state level governments or to the federal government, which is the custodian of the National Firearms Agreement. And you were mentioning just before we started about the National Firearms Register.
What's happened in the past, I think it's about a month to 6 weeks. It started off in Northern Territory where the Northern Territory Police, I think it was, that put up a post saying, you basically coercion that you needed to click this link and fill out your form for the National Firearms Registry, and you had to take photos of your firearms, fill out a questionnaire and everything in between. Now, there hasn't been any tenders for this as far as I'm concerned. There has been no tenders for the creation of the database or who's going to implement anything. We are so far behind to what they said they were going to do. And then Tasmania put a little thing up about it as well. Obviously not to the same degree, but they were talking about it. I'm surprised other states haven't jumped up on the same bandwagon as Northern Territory. But we have to really be cautious what's going to happen here. And, with what's going on in every state, we're looking at Q-Poll at the moment, with the calibers and not giving permit to acquires, or, what the Western Australian government's done, or what Tasmania is going to do or tried to do. If we start having people in the Senate, for instance, we have the ability to question what's happening behind the scenes around Australia. If we had an inquiry with commissioners from around Australia, we can question them and say, what have you been doing about this, this, and this? What's been happening in these meetings that the commissioners have a couple times a year? What have you been organising? Because it's not the ministers doing it. It's coming from above. And I say above because at the end of the day, we've seen the police commissioners standing over the ministers, and it's not right.
Just as a given a portfolio, because the party wants them to manage it. They don't. They're really trying to keep their nose clean because they want that longevity in their political career. So really don't want to make waves. They don't want to make waves with the bureaucracy either. which leads to exactly to where you're going. You mentioned Northern Territory. It's interesting because the Deputy Chief Minister of Northern Territory is Gerard Maley, who was because they had Labor got kicked out in September last year, and the country Liberal Party got elected. Now, Gerard is very much a shooter. He's got multiple categories of licenses. He's a pig shooter. He's got a couple of safes, and so he's very much into it. You'd think the Deputy Chief Commissioner would be able to step on that. Now, I don't know if I'm sure there's discussion behind closed doors. I'd like to think that he's a very unhappy camper with what's happened. But this is where you mentioned before, people who don't actually stand up for shooters. I'm keen to see how this plays out in Northern Territory.
Oh, absolutely. And it's really funny, that Northern Territory's talking about people having to register on this link. But it wasn't that long ago that they had a shooting competition in the Northern Territory. But the government didn't understand the implications when they put in the interstate license restrictions for ammo. So they had a shooting competition in Northern Territory, for those of you who haven't heard, and then all of a sudden they mandated that no one with interstate licenses could come in and buy ammunition. How ridiculous. Anyway, obviously they rescinded that because it's idiotic. It just made no sense.
No. With the election coming up, how can people, obviously we want shooters to vote for SFP, certainly in Tassie. Do it because that's the only, you can always put Labor or Liberal, after the shooters officials if you want. You can still have your preferences go to them, but you need to, if you want to vote for your sport, if you want to keep your guns and stop the sort of stuff you're hearing about from happening, you've got to go SFP1, not only in the Senate, but in Lions, which you said.
Yeah.
How can shooters also help the party? Because there's still time.
Oh, look, there's always time because this is the long game. Obviously, this has been going on since 96, even before 96 to some people. Ultimately, look, we've come into this election crowdfunding to try and pay for nominations. Now, that's not easy to do. And we're the only ones in Tasmania standing up for firearms owners' rights. No one else has talked about it or wants to talk about it in this election or any election. Now, in other states, you will have candidates and parties that may be pro-firearms, and, it's up to you to find them and make sure that they're not on that bandwagon, as I said before. But we do need support, and donations go a long way. So $2,000 for one nomination in this election, right? How many memberships? We've got $6,000 in nominations. How many memberships? I fought so hard to have the three candidates we have here now, and I'm proud that we have three of us standing for Tasmania.
So and you've got other expenses too with call flutes and the printing of how to vote cards and things like that. How can people contribute to SFP Tasmania?
If you want to donate to the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers Party in Tasmania, reach out to us and we can give you private details to be able to do that, so you know that we're getting it directly. So that's really important. But also, it's really important that you support the likes of Shooters Union, for instance, because they're not political, but they are a lobbying organisation and do the exact same thing as what we're doing in Tasmania with the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers Party. A lot happens behind the scenes, and we've got to keep the fight going. And unfortunately, the world revolves around money now, doesn't it?
Yeah, everything costs. You can't, especially with elections. As I said, you got stuff to print as well. You got nomination fees. No card, no vote. So look, I think the best way in the case would be for people to, your email address is up on the screen now. People can contact you directly, or they can donate through Shooters Union or Politics Reloaded, and just make it clear this is for SFP Tasmania, and the money will just go straight through to you. So I think that's something. The other thing is, and again, if you want people to email you directly, I've got your email address still up on the screen. Joining a YouTube channel means you'll see episodes of Gun News Australia as soon as they come out, which means you can see them before they're published more widely. Plus, we'll be running Friday night live streams exclusively for members. So sign up as a member using the link in the description to this video.
Look, what we really need more than anything is having people advocate for us to their friends, family. You're at the pub and you hear someone, talking about a deer shoot, or they're going out the wallaby. Have a quick 5-minute chat to them, saying, "Look, do you know about Philip Bigg? Do you know about Melanie Roach? Do you know about Carlo DeFalco? Do you know what they're trying to do? Do you know what they're standing up for?" That's more important than anything. We can waste our money on how to vote cards, which we're not going to do because we don't have it. But ultimately, at the end of the day, the most powerful thing we have is people. We need the people to stand beside us and work with us. And if you don't agree with us, don't attack us. Reach out to us and say, "Look, I don't really agree with this," or "Could you explain a bit more?" The connection with people is more important than anything else, and that's what I want to see, happen, is people start communicating and reaching out to us.
Yeah, and you can't. Every shooter knows other shooters.
Yeah.
They might know a few, might know only a couple. A lot of shooters are a member of clubs, so there's all is it in there, and of course dealers, people who work in the industry, whether you are I don't know, gunsmith or you retail. There might not be that many of you in Tasmania, but you are the contact point for shooters. Next time somebody comes in your shop, have a chat with them, saying, "Look, by the way, we've got an election coming up. It'd be really good if you could support SFP because we really need the shooter's voice heard." So I hope they listen to that message.
Yeah, it makes a world of difference. I mean, I've spoken to quite a few firearms dealers in Tasmania, and they're sick of it as well. But the biggest issue is other organisations who don't do anything to help, and in Tasmania that is very well known, and it's only going to get worse. We don't. We're small. We're Tasmania. Most people know one person who knows another person, and they're basically all interconnected. And we have an organisation sitting there that, in the past elections, has done nothing. Wouldn't even send a mail out for us as the Shooters, Fishers, Farmers Party Tasmania, and that just really upsets me. It's so disappointing because here we are advocating for their members, and they won't do anything to help us because they're apolitical. It's absolute bullshit.
I can understand why some shooting organisations may want to be apolitical and engage in elections, especially when they've got programs with governments and things like that. But when organisations say they represent the interests of shooters, when they say that that's what they do and then they don't, that's straight out deception. And they're the ones that got to be called out. And I think we're both being very kind to them, to be perfectly honest. But they either represent the political interests of shooters or they don't.
Well, I mean, the other thing is you have that monopoly behind it too. Like in Tasmania, say if you have a H license, handgun license, you're beholden to them because there's not many private ranges. So you can't go after them and say, "Pull your fingers out and help us." Then obviously another issue and another really important issue is why I want to run for the Senate is ESGs, which was environment, social and governance policies, which banks, insurance, major corporations have. These ESGs in the banking sector and insurance sector are seriously affecting firearms owners, firearms dealers, historic societies, military guilds, you name it, because they're basically saying in their insurance policies that you cannot lobby government, otherwise we will cancel your policy.
Their response to Phil Bigg, citizen, is in you raising your objection to that is, "Well, we don't care who you are, go away." Their response to Phil Bigg, the senator in Tasmania, is very different.
Oh, it would be cowardice talks of, "Oh, we're just trying to be responsible people and look after the environment and everything else." I mean, it wasn't that long ago. The news broke about one of the banks not supporting a family who had a logging business, right? regrowth logging, not going out destroying forests. This is they own the land, regrowth logging, been doing it for generations, and the bank basically said, we're not helping you anymore. That's what ESGs do. When they decide that you're not good enough for them to service anymore, you're gone. And it won't be long, I reckon, if this ESG keeps getting bigger and bigger, that anyone who's a law-abiding firearms owner and speaks out, your bank account will be closed, like we've seen with, I think it was a journalist in New South Wales had her bank accounts closed because she was speaking out against the government. This is why we need people in the Senate. We need people not afraid to speak out.
Yeah. Give me a short list, maybe 2 or 3 things that you would love to get your teeth into if you actually ended up in the federal Senate. What are a couple of things that you would launch into?
ESGs would definitely be one of them. That would have to be a major one. Look, it spreads so far because everything's interconnected. As I was just saying, ESGs, banking, insurance. You start with one and then you keep going down the line. I personally, having the opportunity, I would actually call for a royal commission into Port Arthur. That's a very unfavorable subject to some people, and that was actually called out last year with one of the newspapers in Tasmania, and the editor felt the need to write a personal attack against the Shooters Fishers Farmers Party for suggesting as such. There's lots of issues going around, but the other ones too. I want to see we need to look into what's happening medically in Australia. We've got a failing healthcare system, and then we have ideologies being at play as well that really have no place, whether it be in the medical system or in education. There are so many facets that we need to cover, but there's just not enough time to do it, I don't think, in this podcast. But
that's all right. Well, Port Arthur, we'll just come back to that. I mean, I and a lot of other shooters really, you hear people go on about their own conspiracy theories about, this and that. It's a bit like, Lee Harvey Oswald and, and I tend to just, I don't want to hear, unless there's something that I can draw a connection to straight away. You understand? Not interested in hearing that a lot of that is garbage. However, 35 people died. There's been inquiries and royal commissions called in for a lot less than that. The Bondi stabbings, there was an inquiry. 6 people died. Lint Cafe siege in Sydney, 2 people died. There was an inquiry into that. 35 people died. It does raise a real question. And put everything else aside, it's just a matter of why wouldn't you have an inquiry into the biggest, one of the biggest sort of mass killings in Australia? Why wouldn't you?
No, and look at this objectively. Files have been sealed, no trial. The list just keeps going on, whether you're a conspiracy theorist or not. And that terminology is 2 or more people believing in the same thing to be technical. So everyone likes to use conspiracy theorists as a label these days. But the reality is a lot of people think that answers are deserved. And in Tasmania, I know that for a fact. There are prominent people in Tasmania that would like to see it happen.
It's okay, it costs money and all, but it's as I said, otherwise you're just saying, oh, whatever happened to the 35 people doesn't matter. We'll just forget about it. Well, no, and for shooters, it's a very close to home. I mean, I know that former Premier Goodwin, Peter Goodwin, he was tied up with some gun club. I think he was a patron of a club, and that sort of fell by the wayside. And in fact, the Department of Education still will prohibit school groups from engaging in shooting sports. And it all becomes back to this whole Port Arthur thing. It's got to go.
Yeah, look, I love Bob Catter, and when he said we need to put the firearms back in the schools, I'm 100% behind him. It's hard to disagree with Bob. I mean, and if you did, he'd probably job you in the face. But these are the things we need to have. Poland, for instance, they've brought firearms back into the schools, and no accidents have happened. It's overreaction everywhere. And now at the moment, we've got the WASP files coming out. Have you heard about that? Okay, so it's this actor, journalist, doing all interviews and releasing files on Port Arthur. People that were there when it happened. And getting all the information out there objectively, no conspiracy. I encourage everyone to kind of have a look at that. But it really makes you question why we've never had an inquiry. But meanwhile, stabbing in Sydney, inquiry, as you said.
Way out of proportion. I don't understand it. Okay, Phil, look, thank you so much for that. Really appreciate your time today. And just putting the call out again for shooters to spread the word, to support shooters, fishers and farmers in Tasmania at the federal election. And you can do that either in the set of lines, by putting Carlo Di Falco, 1 and a number of the other boxes. In the Senate, look for shooters, fishers, farmers over on the right-hand side next to Labor. But control your preferences. There are no preferences automatically going to Labor. They just happen to have the ballot draw that way. And take your time to vote. Vote properly. And so Phil Bigg, I really appreciate you being on the program again.
No worries. It's always great to have a chat with you and unload a little bit of stress, I think.
Not a problem. Okay. Thanks very much. We'll see you later.
Thanks.
Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode of Gun News Australia. If you're a subscriber to our YouTube channel, you'll have access to every episode of Gun News Australia as it's scheduled to be published. But now you can also join the channel. Joining the channel means you'll get access to those episodes before they're published more widely. And you'll have access to our Friday night live streams, which are starting soon. So to find out more, select the join button on a YouTube channel or see the description in this episode for details.